Welcome to Part 7 of the VenueMagic Events Tutorials as part of the Secrets of the VenueMagic Masters series of video tutorials. In this video, we'll have fun building on the Storm demo we created in Part 6 by introducing you to virtual fixtures together with external time-based timelines. But before we get started, I'd like to welcome back my good friend, Fran. Say hi to everyone, Fran.
My name's not Fran, Brad.
That's right, I'm sorry. It's Susan, isn't it? Say hello to Susan, everyone.
Hello, Susan.
Hi, everyone. It's not Susan either.
This tutorial will require the features of VenueMagic SC Plus 4.0 and above. Also, as always, we expect that you have already viewed the VenueMagic Getting Started series of videos. If you haven't, you might consider doing that. Be sure you've also viewed the first 6 videos of this series on VenueMagic events. Going back to the rain and winds timeline from Part 6, we can see that it loops through the different rain and wind sounds, all of which are playing at once. Then we used the VCS sliders to bring out the rain and wind tracks that we wanted to hear, starting with the light rain and a little bit of lightning and growing into heavier rain with wind and a lot more lightning. It was a glorious storm and completely under our control. Now, if we wanted to run all that from a timeline rather than manually with the sliders, we could simply adjust the volume envelopes of each audio track in the rain and wind timeline to automate what we did with the sliders. Everything you need to do that you learned in the Getting Started videos. Just open up the envelope editor and draw up an appropriate volume envelope for each track. But we're not going to do it that way. Instead, we're going to let the rain and wind timeline loop normally. And we're going to control all of those volumes as well as the lightning density from a different timeline. But how can we do that?
Well, the first thing we're going to do is introduce you all to virtual fixtures. Not in too much detail, mind you, because the topic of virtual fixtures will be covered in more detail later on in another video. Virtual fixtures are used exactly like other fixtures. You can add them to timeline control track just like regular DMX or other fixtures. The difference is that virtual fixtures don't need to control actual hardware. What makes a virtual fixture channel special is that they can be both output channels and external input channels at the same time. Let's start by creating a virtual fixture that can take the place of our storm control sliders. Go up to the main menu and click on Devices, then select Virtual Fixtures. Setting up a virtual fixture is done in 2 parts. First, we have to create a virtual fixture in the User Fixture library. Click here to open the screen. You might have noticed that this is the same screen we use for creating custom DMX fixtures and adding them to VenueMagic. If you don't recognize this screen, well, I'm sure there's an old tutorial for it somewhere on YouTube. Just do a search on VenueMagic User Fixture Library. Or you could just, you guessed it, hit the F1 key. This selector here tells us that the screen is for virtual fixtures, instead of DMX or script fixtures. By the way, please don't ask what script fixtures are because we're not going there today. There is no manufacturer for virtual fixtures, so we'll go right into adding a new fixture and call it Storm Control. The fixture type doesn't really matter, so we can just leave it at the default, which is lamp. Now let's add some channels. We will need a total of 7 dimmer type channels for what we want to do. However, let's add 10 so that we have some spares, just in case. Then give the channels names that correspond to what we want to control with them. First, there's thunder volume, then thunder density, rain volume, heavy rain volume, gutter rain volume, and wind volume. I'm going to add a 7th one called Storm Intensity, which we'll use later on. Leave the last 3 channels as they are for now. Click Save and Close, and we're back to the Setup Virtual Fixtures window. The next step is to create an instance of the virtual fixture we just built. Click Add, select our Storm Control fixture we just created, and click OK, and done. Next, we're going to use these virtual fixture channels to control the track volumes on the rain and wind timeline. If I wanted to, I could just replace the master level controls for each track, which are currently set up to respond to moving sliders, with the virtual fixture channels instead. However, to make this interesting, we're going to leave the slider control in place and instead have the virtual fixture channels control the VCS sliders so that the virtual fixture channels indirectly control the track volumes through the sliders.
Confusing? Well, this should be more clear in a few moments.
I'm doing it this way so we can more easily visualize what's going on by watching the sliders go up and down with the virtual fixture channels. Double-click on the Thunder Volume slider to bring up its properties and check External Control Level Source. You can see that Virtual Fixtures is one of the options that comes up in the Select External Input window. Then, under Device Input group, select the virtual fixture we just created and see a list of all of its channels. Select Thunder Volume and click OK. We'll need to do the same with other sliders as well.
Brad, please kill the cheesy lift music. This is not going to take that long.
And there we are. Back to you, Brad.
I'm done, Brad. Brad, you're up. Brad!
Right. So now let's add another timeline and call it Storm Control. Add 5 more device control tracks in addition to the default one. We can also remove the audio track because we won't need it. Next, we'll find our virtual fixture in the Fixture folder of the project window and assign one channel for each track. We could put them all into one track, but keeping them separate will make things easier to visualize in our tutorial. Also, let's name the tracks so we know what channel it outputs to. I'll pause recording and do that to save time. Now, each track is going to need a level control effect, about 20 seconds long. This is going to be a pretty short storm. Once you size one clip, it's easier just to copy and paste. So the goal of this timeline is to ramp up the storm from nothing at the beginning, gradually growing until it's at full strength at the end of the timeline. To do this, we're going to build envelopes to control the volume and lightning density at each part of the storm. We'll start with the thunder volume. Double-click on the level control clip to open the envelope editor. I'd like to make the thunder start at a low volume level because it's in the distance and gradually pick up with a big surge at the end of the timeline. We can do something similar with the thunder density. For the rain, let's start with a little gutter rain, which is relatively gentle rain, and keep it more or less constant throughout. Our rain track controls the volume of the medium rain, which will make silent until just shy of halfway through. Then it grows quickly in volume and remains constant the rest of the way. The heavy rain will remain at 0 until just before the lightning intensity grows, at which point it goes full on. Now let's make sure all the virtual fixture channels are at 0 by clicking on the All Dimmers Off icon. Notice how the sliders also go to 0 because they're being controlled by the virtual fixture channels, which we just set to 0. Now start our looping rain and wind timeline running in the background by clicking on the Q button. The first thing I'm going to do is move these sliders up and down to show you that they still work the same as before. They each adjust a different aspect of our storm. All we did was make the sliders controllable by the virtual fixture channels, and then the virtual fixture channels, in turn, are controlled by the storm control timeline. When I hit play, it should take us through silence all the way to a full storm. Again, keep in mind that the storm control timeline is not actually playing the storm. It's just adjusting the sliders through the virtual fixture channels, which varies the rain, wind, and thunder. So I'll hit play and we'll see what happens. There are 3 things I hope you noticed. First, the sliders were moving by themselves because the storm control timeline was controlling them via the virtual fixture channels. Second, when the storm control timeline reached the end of the playback, the storm did not stop. All it did was adjust the sliders and then leave them in their last positions when it stopped. The rain and wind timeline just keeps on going, as well as the event table event that does our lightning. Third, I ultimately turned off the storm by simply clicking on the Turn Off All Dimmers button, which really didn't stop anything from playing, it just turned all the volumes down. And that is how we ramp up our storm. At this point, we've covered quite a bit for one tutorial, but we're not quite done just yet. However, if you need to take a quick break, that's fine. Now would be a great time to go get a donut or something. Go on now, we'll wait for you.
Really, Brad? A candy bar snipe?
Sure, who doesn't like donuts?
Brad.
Okay, it's almost done.
Our goal for this video was to... Are you done yet?
I'm done.
Our goal for this video was to control the storm's intensity with a single slider, and we're almost there. First, we need to go back to the VCS and add a single slider for storm intensity. We'll call it Storm Intense. Now go back to the storm control timeline and double-click on the control panel for the Thunder volume track. Click on the External Control tab, then check the Use External Device Level as Timebase box, and click here to select an input. We'll use the VCS slider we just created, Storm Intensity. What this does is replace the normal timeline playback time source with the VCS slider control. When we close the setting window, notice that the track panel now shows External Timebase. If we were to hit play, all the tracks would play using the regular timeline time source, except for this track, which gets its time from the VCS slider. Notice this line going back and forth across the external Timebase track as I move the slider. We need to do the same for all the tracks now. Music, please. With all the tracks set to external Timebase, we can move the timeline through time by moving the slider up and down. As I push the slider up, we go forward in time. Pull it back down again, and we go backwards in time. This, in turn, adjusts the levels for our storm, including the other sliders, all at once. So let me give you a quick summary of what's going on. As I move the storm intensity slider up and down, it changes the current playback time of the storm control timeline. This timeline then outputs these levels to our storm control virtual fixture channels, which in turn control the other sliders. Finally, these other sliders were set up in our last video to control the volumes of the different tracks in the rain and wind timeline. And there you have it. Brad, can we lose the popcorn dog? One thing I forgot to mention. For this to work, the external time-based timeline must be playing, even if it's not technically playing anything. It's just waiting for me to move the slider up and down. If I stop playback, it doesn't work anymore. Oh, and you don't have to run this timeline in the editor. Instead, you can run it in the queue list. So let's add a button to do this. Find Storm Control in the Timeline folder and drag it into the queue buttons. Then click it. You can see it here running in the queue list with the playtime columns dashed out. The status also says EXT time, which is short for External Timebase. This will run forever in the queue list until we explicitly stop it. But as you can see, we can now control our entire storm with one slider.
Before we wrap up this video, there's one more thing I'd like to show you. Suppose that instead of moving the storm intensity slider up and down manually, I wanted to control it with a timeline. Well, that's really just an extension of what we've already done. Let's open the properties for the storm intensity slider and select an external control for it as well. Select Virtual Fixture Interface, the Storm Control Fixture, and then select the Storm Intensity channel. You'll recall that I named that channel when we first created the Storm Control Virtual Fixture, but we haven't used it yet. Click OK. Next, we'll create a new timeline and call it Storm 1. Drag the Storm Intensity channel into the control track, then drag over a level control effect. Open the envelope editor and place a couple of handles. When we run this timeline, it will increase the storm intensity over time, hold it at the highest level for a few seconds, then ramp down the storm until it's gone, all in about 20 seconds. We can change the length of the storm by resizing the level control clip and maybe even add some music to make it more interesting. Oh, and let's add a single lightning and thunder crash on cue with the music. We can do it quickly by dragging one of the lightning timelines into an event track. Make sure that both the rain and wind timelines and the storm control timelines are running by clicking on their cue buttons, then hit play. Pretty cool, huh? That's probably the fastest storm on record.
Using the external Timebase together with virtual fixtures, we can do much more than just control volume levels. For example, using this technique is a good way to simulate a custom color wheel for an RGB light. If you're doing animatronics, you can do coordinated control of multiple motors at once with a single slider or virtual fixture channel. In fact, we'll show you how to do that in a future video. The possibilities are literally endless.
Wow, that was probably the longest video of our series on VenueMagic events.
And we didn't learn anything new about events.
In the next video, we're actually going to go back to talking about VenueMagic events. We'll learn how to use multi-events to implement combination codes for escape room puzzles and other applications. Until then, this is Brad.
And this is Brad's partner.
Have
Have
a
a
great
great
day.
day.
Why didn't you tell them your name?
I'm not letting you off that easy, Brad.
I think it's about time for another donut.